Slow start. Not every UFC strategy is about throwing bombs from the opening bell. Sometimes the smartest move is doing almost nothing. This is what's called a slow start. Fighters will deliberately give up the first round, not because they're scared of genuinely getting outclassed, but because they're calculating. They're using those 5 minutes to download data, watching how their opponent moves, reacts, or sets up strikes. One of the best examples is Petr Yan vs. Aljamain Sterling 1. In that fight, Yan looked like he was almost sleepwalking through the first round. Sterling came out with 100% effort, throwing every strike in the book. To the average fan, it looked like Aljamain Sterling was dominating, but Yan wasn't overwhelmed. He was just studying. Yan used the opening round to figure out Sterling's pace, his rhythm, and the holes in his attacks. Then once he had enough information, he turned the fight completely around. To be honest, he didn't even need an entire round. From this moment on, Yan looked like he was fighting on cheat codes. Every time Sterling tried to push forward, Yan made him pay. And Sterling, who had emptied the tank early, started drowning. The slow start is risky. You're basically giving your opponent a round on the judges' scorecards. But if you're confident in your ability to take over late, it can be devastating. Yan may have lost that fight because of the illegal knee, but up until then, the slow start strategy was working to perfection. Playing the crowd. MMA isn't just fighting, it's performing. And some fighters know that the crowd can be just as much of a weapon as their fist. This is the strategy of playing the crowd. Instead of purely focusing on damage, these fighters use body language, showboating, and theatrics to convince everyone watching, including the judges, that they're in control. Think about those moments when a fighter gets clipped with a hard shot. Instead of backing up, they grin, wave their opponent forward, or bang their chest like nothing happened. It doesn't matter if that punch actually hurt. What matters is the message. I'm fine. This guy can't hurt me. Why does it work? Because judges are human. If one fighter looks hurt, tired, or hesitant, while the other looks confident, the optics can swing a close round. And the crowd plays into this perfectly. If you can rile up thousands of fans, make them cheer every time you throw, even if nothing lands clean, it creates an illusion of dominance. One of the masters of this was Anderson Silva. In countless fights, he would drop his hands, lean back against the cage, and dare opponents to hit him. Every miss made Silva look levels above his opponent, and every counter he landed made the crowd explode. That atmosphere influences everyone. The audience at home, the judges, even the guy standing across from him. Not that Prime Silva ever really needed to convince the judges anyway. There's also Nate Diaz. Slapping people mid-fight, throwing his hands in the air, taunting his opponents relentlessly. Half the time, Nate isn't landing the most damaging shots, but the way he sells them makes it feel like he's winning the exchange. The judges see confidence, the crowd goes wild, and suddenly his volume looks way more effective. Playing the crowd is psychological warfare. It doesn't directly hurt your opponent, but it makes them second-guess themselves. It tilts the judging optics, and it creates an energy in the arena that can carry you through a close fight. In a sport where razor-thin fights are common, and bad judging is even more common, perception can sometimes be more powerful than reality. Busy shots. Not every strike in MMA is meant to hurt. Sometimes fighters throw shots that are basically filler. These are called busy shots. They're not meant to knock someone out or even do real damage. They're just there to trick the judges into thinking you're working, while you're really just controlling the fight. The perfect example is Kamaru Usman vs. George Masvidal 1. In that fight, Usman didn't just use his wrestling to hold Masvidal against the fence. He made sure to sprinkle in some little foot stomps. None of those strikes were going to finish the fight, but they kept him busy. And most importantly, they made it look like he was the one dictating everything. Busy shots serve two purposes. First, they prevent the referee from breaking up a clinch or ground position. If you're just holding on and doing nothing, the ref might reset the fight. But if you're constantly throwing something, even if it's the world's weakest foot stomp, it looks like you're working, and the position stays yours. Second, they sway the optics. From the outside, the average fan or even judge might see one fighter constantly throwing, and the other one just standing there and trying to defend. Even if the strikes have no real impact, activity often looks like dominance. Masvidal was visibly frustrated when Usman stomped his toes and leaned on him. It wasn't flashy or violent, but it was effective. Usman wasn't trying to knock out George with those shots. He's just trying to win rounds through control, while conserving energy and staying safe. And he did exactly that, cruising to a clear decision. Sandbagging. Sometimes the smartest way to win a fight is to lose a round on purpose. This is the strategy known as sandbagging. Similar to the slow start, it's when a fighter deliberately takes their foot off the gas, but usually in the middle rounds, to save energy, recover, and then come alive when it matters most, the championship rounds. A perfect example is Alex Pereira in his first fight with Adesanya. After spending round 3 in a grueling grappling exchange with Izzy, Pereira looked gassed. His output slowed, his pressure faded, and it almost seemed like Adesanya was running away with the fight. But here's the thing, Pereira wasn't broken. He was conserving. By essentially throwing away that 4th round, Pereira bought himself time to recover. He let Izzy get comfortable, maybe even overconfident, while he quietly reset. Then in round 5, Pereira flipped the switch. He stormed forward, unleashed his power shots, and found the finish that crowned him champion. Sandbagging is high risk, high reward. If judges score those middle rounds too heavily, or your opponent capitalizes and hurts you badly while you're coasting, it can backfire instantly. But when done right, it's devastating. Opponents think you're fading, the crowd thinks you're done, and then suddenly you're sprinting at them in the final round with fresh legs and knockout power. It's a gamble, but for fighters like Pereira, who only need one opening to change a fight, sandbagging can be the difference between losing on the scorecards and walking away with a belt. Stealing rounds. In MMA, sometimes the entire round doesn't matter as much as how you end it. That's the idea behind stealing rounds. A fighter might cruise or even get outworked for 4.5 minutes, but in the final 30 seconds, they suddenly explode, throwing a flurry of punches, going for a takedown, or landing something flashy to make it look like they were the one in control. It's all about optics. Judges are human, and memory's short. If the last thing they see is you pressing forward, landing shots, and looking dominant, it can erase a lot of what happened earlier. That one final push can swing a close round in your favor. We've seen this tactic countless times. George St. Pierre was a master of it. Not because he was losing rounds, but because he always knew the value of timing. He'd often secure a late takedown right before the horn, leaving no doubt in the judges' minds who had control. Another fighter notorious for this was Michael Bisping. His style was built on volume and activity, but when a round was close, he'd turn it up in those dying seconds, landing a quick combination, shouting at his opponent, and raising his hands as if he knew he'd just stolen it. If you can convince the judges that you had the upper hand when the horn sounds, you can rack up points on the scorecards without actually winning the majority of the round. It's a strategy as old as combat sports themselves. End strong and leave the lasting impression. Coasting and banking early rounds. Sometimes a fighter gets ahead early and decides to hit cruise control. This strategy is called coasting, and it usually happens after a fighter has already banked early rounds. If you clearly win the first 3 rounds of a 5-round fight, technically you only need to survive. Fighters know this, and instead of chasing a finish, they'll play it safe, minimizing risk, conserving energy, and just trying not to get caught with anything big. But coasting comes with its own dangers. The most infamous example is Kamaru Usman vs. Leon Edwards 2. Going into the 5th round, Usman was comfortably ahead on the scorecards. He had weathered the storm, imposed his wrestling. All he needed to do was stay safe for 5 more minutes. Instead, Usman coasted a little too confidently. He kept it standing, looked to manage the clock, and assumed Leon had nothing left. That's when Edwards uncorked one of the most iconic head kick knockouts in UFC history, erasing Usman's lead in an instant. One kick flipped the entire fight from a safe decision win into a devastating loss. Coasting works when your opponent has no finishing threat, but when you're facing someone dangerous, coasting can turn into gambling, milking the clock. Fighting's exhausting. 5 minutes in the cage can feel like an eternity. So sometimes, fighters find ways to stretch the rules and squeeze out every extra second of rest they can. This strategy is called milking the clock. It comes in a few different forms. The most famous example is Yoel Romero vs. Tim Kennedy. At the start of round 3, Yoel stayed sitting on his stool for a full 90 extra seconds before the fight resumed. His corner was blamed for leaving too much Vaseline on his face. The commission scrambled to fix it, and all the while Yoel Romero got precious time to recover. He came out fresh, blasted Kennedy, and went on to win the fight. Then there's the infamous ice spill incident. A cornerman accidentally dumped an entire bucket of ice all over the octagon floor between rounds, forcing the officials to scramble with towels while the fighter calmly got an extended break. Joe Rogan's commentary during the moment says it all.
This is a disaster. Look at that, they knocked the bucket over. This is the Three Stooges. Get back in there! You're not done! There's ice all over the floor!
Now this example wasn't intentional, but it shows that if your cornerman thought that you needed more time to recover, they could accidentally drop a bag of ice on the ground. And of course, there are legal ways to milk the clock too. If you get kicked low, you're entitled to a full 5 minutes to recover. Some fighters will take all 5, but some who are known for the pressure and cardio don't want to give their opponent any time to rest. Playing possum. Sometimes the best way to land a knockout is to pretend you're about to get knocked out yourself. This is the strategy of playing possum. A fighter will act hurt, wobbling, stumbling, even dropping their hands to bait the opponent into charging in recklessly. And the moment they take the bait, boom, counter strike. Another master of this is Derrick Lewis. He'll look exhausted, back against the fence, hands low, like he's one shot away from being finished. Opponents rush in for the kill, and Derrick Lewis unleashes his trademark knockout power. Of course, it's a dangerous game. If you pretend you're hurt and your opponent doesn't fall for it, you just look like you actually are hurt.